Africa Enlightenment Center: Religious, Political and Social Enlightenment.
Well, I mean, it's very clear. I don't think there's anything that is yet to be understood. Um, there was a revolutionary process which began, I believe it was 2014, when Blaise Compaoré was overthrown, and then the supposedly democratic president was came to power eventually, then was overthrown by Colonel Damiba in another popular revolution. And then in 2022, Ibrahim Traore then took over from Colonel Damiba in a bloodless coup. And the reason behind this revolutionary process was twofold, and it was the same reason. The first was that um, with the rise of internet penetration and access to information, more and more Burkinabes have become aware of the history of Blaise Compaoré as basically the guy who was responsible for the death of Thomas Sankara, who was the best and the most significant leader in Burkinabe history. So they understood that this guy is their enemy and that their what they consider to be their leadership ideal will be somebody who represents the vision of Thomas Sankara. So when the successor of Blaise Compaoré failed to be that person and turned out to be just another French lackey, then they rebelled against him too. And then when the successor of this democratically elected president, Colonel Damiba, also failed to also failed to adequately embody this um, Sankaraist reforms that they were hoping to see, then they booted him out. So I guess the important takeaway here, which I guess not a lot of people outside of West Africa understand, is that this wasn't a military takeover. It's very tempting to think of it in those very simplistic terms that a group of soldiers just went and grabbed power. That is not what happened. It was a popular revolution which was then backed by the military. People forget that initially, when this revolutionary process began in 2014, before ever Blaise Compaoré was overthrown, what actually happened was that Blaise Compaoré actually set the military against the protesters, and people were getting shot dead in the streets by the military under the orders of Blaise Compaoré. And then eventually, when the protests overwhelmed the government, they set the national parliament on fire. And Blaise Compaoré was then forced to flee the country when the military basically said, "We're not killing Burkinabes for you any longer." Then that is what kicked off this revolutionary process in earnest. So Captain Traore represents um, the culmination of that revolutionary process, which was started by ordinary Burkinabes. So it wasn't Captain Traore's big idea to seize power and become this. He is just the tip of the spear. He's just the embodiment of the process that began in 2014. So I think it's very important for people to understand this because there's this narrative kite that is being flown that Ibrahim Traore is yet another hungry African strongman who just wants to seize national resources and you eat his own share. Which again we've seen military leaders like that on the African continent loads of times. So for those who aren't aware of the local dynamics, it's very easy to dismiss him. Oh yeah, this is just another one of those hungry khaki boys. That's not the case at all. Obviously, there are two types of reactions from Nigeria. There's those um, who are broadly in favor of what is perceived as a Sahelian revolution. So broadly speaking, there are those who are in favor, very much in favor of everything to do with the AES and the Sahelian revolution. And then conversely, you have those who they have something I call Traore derangement syndrome, where once they hear this guy's name, all they hear on their body stands in rage, in anger. They don't want to hear anything to do with this guy. And it's for a very simple reason that you see these disparate reactions. So for the first group of people, and I count myself among this group of people, they're seeing hope for Nigeria, which comes from the fact that a smaller country in the same geopolitical region that Nigeria is in is actually able to rebel against the sort of um, colonially programmed position that it has in the world. So the position that African countries have been given in the existing global order of things is that they must be producers of raw materials, cheap labor, and nothing more.
Mm-hmm.
And that the conditions to lead to general upliftment in living standards and the creation of a proper national elite, those things shouldn't exist. That's the condition that Africa is in. But the emergence of not just Captain Traore, but the AES collective, because it's very important to cite this as part of a collective effort of 72 million people, which is what it is. This is challenging that notion and challenging that narrative. The idea that it is not possible for Africa to break out of that role that has been assigned to it. And that's why people like me see a lot of hope in what Ibrahim Traore represents and what Asimi Goita represents and what Abdurrahman Chiani represents and what their countries represent. Now, the second group of people are basically people who are either on the payroll of Western sponsored civil society. So they obviously have a very clear incentive for telling only one story, for saying there's only one type of story you're ever going to hear from those people. And it's the same story you heard about Gaddafi, the same story you heard about Saddam Hussein, the same story you heard about etc., etc., etc. Repressive, dictatorship, atmosphere of fear, no press freedom, violation of human rights, blah blah, civil liberties, yada 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 yada. The same stuff. And then obviously people who are either in government or on the payroll of the government. And obviously the current government in Nigeria is the same government that literally tried to invade Niger a couple of years ago over, what later became the AES. So it's very clear what their incentive is. That group of people believe that the rise of Ibrahim Traore represents an existential threat to the Nigerian establishment because if an Ibrahim Traore were to rise in Nigeria, you know what that would mean for the Nigerian establishment. A lot of people are going to die. A lot of livelihoods are going to be disrupted. A lot of existences are just going to be changed overnight in ways that they don't like. So that's where that groundswell of disapproval from that group of people, that's the place it's coming